Hey guys, I'm Cameron. I'm a marriage therapist and the founder of the Hitched app, the first ever evidence-based personalized blueprint for lifelong marriage. So I'm really excited about today's video because it marks the beginning of a series of videos that I want to do on applying very famous life philosophies to marriage. Because I think a lot of the times when we talk about these famous philosophies, whether it's stoicism or existentialism or anything else, that a lot of the times we focus on how they can apply to our personal life more so than our relationships and very rarely to our marriage. And so I really want to pull all of the best information as much as possible from these different life philosophies and basically give it to you guys on a silver platter so that you can immediately implement it into your marriage, so that you can glean all the practical wisdom possible from these life philosophies to use in your marriage and your everyday life. So in today's video, we're going to talk about stoicism. So I went out and read some of the greatest works from Stoic philosophers and believers in stoicism, including Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus. And I pulled some of the best quotes from these works to share with you guys and give you a little bit of commentary on the ways I think you can practically implement what these guys were saying thousands of years ago in a way that is still very relevant today and could be incredibly helpful in your marriage, depending on what you and your spouse are going through right now. But before we dive in, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for all things related to building a lifelong, healthy, fulfilling marriage. And if you know anyone who could benefit from the messages in this video, please do share this with them. It lets me know that you guys want to see more content like this. Okay, let's start off with Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. This is a really big one. So Marcus Aurelius is thought by a lot of people to be the best ever Roman emperor. He ruled during the 2nd century and was a devoted practitioner of Stoic philosophy. Okay, so the first quote I want to pull from Meditations is, "Self-reliance and an unequivocal determination not to leave anything to chance." So Marcus Aurelius starts out Meditations with different reflections on people in his life who have had a positive influence on his attitude, his perspective, and the way he lives. And so this quote talks about the importance of taking what I call radical personal responsibility, meaning that whatever happens to you in your life, saying, what can I do to make sure that I am playing as much of a role as possible in the outcomes of my life, rather than relying on other people to get me what I want, relying on chance or fate or good fortune or whatever it is that you call it, rather than relying on that, figuring out what I can do to get to where I want to go. I think this is really huge in marriage because it takes away some of that responsibility that we tend to place on our spouse, maybe fairly or unfairly, but that removes some of our own authority and our own ability to make a difference in the relationship. So if we're able to absorb more responsibility and take on more of the load to improve our marriage, it seems like a heavy burden at first, but it actually ends up making us feel a lot more confident, a lot more capable, because we are embracing the fact that the only person who can do things for us is really ourselves. We can't make anyone else do anything. We have to do it ourselves. Quote number 2, "What he said was also what he thought, and what he did was done with no ill intent." So this one boils down to extreme honesty. So saying what you think, and not necessarily saying everything you think, but if you're asked a question or if you're going to speak, it should be aligned with how you actually feel, what's actually going on in your life, and what's actually true. And the second point of that being doing things with the goodness of other people in mind. So doing things for the benefit of your spouse as best as you can. Essentially having good intention. So sitting down and thinking, okay, how can I clean up my language with my spouse? How can I speak in a way that's more truthful, but that's also more compassionate, that's more kind, that the underlying motivation behind what I'm doing is actually for the goodness of my spouse. And this can be a really difficult conversation to have with ourselves because everyone wants to feel like what they're doing is motivated by good intent. That, of course, we love our spouse. Of course, we want to do what's good for them. And it can be hard to embrace the fact that sometimes we don't behave in a way that we think is going to help our spouse. And other times we actually behave in ways that we know is not going to be good for our spouse when we're angry, when we're frustrated, when we're tired, whatever it is. But cleaning up our language, cleaning up our behavior so that whatever we're contributing to the marriage is positive for the other person and that it's aligned with the truth. Quote number 3, not easily is a man found to be unhappy by reason of his not regarding what is going on in another man's soul. But those who do not attend closely to the motions of their own souls must inevitably be unhappy. So this is one of my favorite ones. This one really has a wonderful reflection in the Bible verse about noticing the speck in your neighbor's eye, but not noticing the log in your own eye. In other words, noticing the flaws in other people's souls or their character before we're able to or willing to look at what's wrong with us. And this is an incredible quote in terms of its application to marriage, because almost without exception, every couple I've ever seen come into the marriage therapy office ready to tell you as the therapist exactly what's wrong with their spouse, exactly all of the bad things that their spouse has done that have negatively contributed to the marriage up to that point. And very rarely do you have people come in and say, look, I screwed up. I cheated, I lied, I betrayed my spouse's trust in some way, I've, been a jerk, whatever it is. Very rarely do we come into a situation that's unideal and say, well, this is how I contributed to it. Most often we are very aware of what other people have done wrong, but less aware of ourselves. And so if we can flip that script and not necessarily ignore everything that our spouse does wrong, because I think that can prevent some progress made later down the line. But if we can start off with what we're doing and attend to our own souls and our own shortcomings, chances are we're going to be a lot happier, not just because we're going to have the opportunity to start improving ourselves, but because we will weight so less heavily the flaws of others in the outcomes of our lives. That's important because we can't control what other people do. And so if we're letting other people so negatively influence us, occupy so much of our headspace with ruminating about their flaws, that's going to make our life worse in a way that we can't control. Quote number 4, eager generosity and perfect openness in the case of those that came in for his censure. So this one's incredible. This has been my challenge recently in my own marriage, is trying to embrace the idea of not just accepting criticism from your spouse, but actually being enthusiastic to get it. So obviously you don't want to be a doormat and not advocate for your spouse to treat you properly and to speak to you with respect and kindness when offering you criticism. So the criticism should be constructive, and if it's not, that's something you guys can work on together. But once your spouse has criticism for you, actually being fully ready and even a little bit excited to get that criticism and start implementing it in your life and trying to adjust the way you are around your spouse or the way you talk to your spouse to be a better spouse. And the reason this is incredible is because when you are able to receive your spouse's criticism positively and say, you know what, you're right, I'm going to try to work on that and be patient with me. I'm not perfect. It's going to take me a little bit of time to break this habit or implement a new one, but I promise you I'm working on this. That completely changes the game, because now your spouse goes from somebody who's nagging you or who's constantly complaining to you to somebody who's trying to benefit you, who's trying to help you become a better version of yourself. So every criticism turns into an expression of love, an expression of care in your mind. This is how you're receiving the message, and you're going to end up being a lot happier as a result. And it's not going to have anything to do with your spouse. It's just going to be a change in your own attitude and your own mindset. And this is really the key in stoicism, is that you aren't trying to change other people. You're changing internally. You are accepting the reality of your situation. You're embracing what your life has to offer right now, and you are choosing to have a constructive, helpful attitude and mindset about it. And the ironic part is, even though we're trying not to change other people, or we're just putting that to the side and that's not a goal, when you change how you conduct yourself, it's going to inevitably change the way people respond to you. If you're more positive, if you are calmer, if you're more kind, you're more intentional in how you talk to people, if you're more honest, if you're braver, that is going to inevitably change the way other people relate to you, because a relationship is made up of two people and the space between them. So when you change one person, the relationship in that space fundamentally changes too. Quote number 5, that which does not make a man himself worse than before cannot make his life worse either. So this is a big one also. These are all huge, but I love this one because it really simply boils down to the concept in stoicism of the quality of your life has everything to do with how you react to the situations you're in, how you react to the people that you come across, how you react to what happens to you. It doesn't have to do with your external circumstances. It has to do with how you react to them. And so that doesn't mean that you think everything is equally good or equally bad. That doesn't mean that if your spouse gets sick, then that's as good as if your spouse were healthy. Or if you lose your job, then that's equally good or valuable or desired as if you kept your job or got a promotion. Of course, that's not true. But those things, the more you can minimize their impact on your quality of life as compared to the impact of your attitude towards them, that brings within control how you live. It brings within control how happy you are, how satisfied you are with your life. And the more peaceful and accepting you can be of your circumstances, the more stable you're going to be, the more capable you're going to be of actually changing those circumstances later. And that's something that I talk about a lot, is that the first step to improving is actually acceptance. You have to accept where you are right now, because if you're going to lie to yourself about the situation you're currently in, you're not going to be able to get where you want to go because you don't even know where you are right now. But if you can accept what is happening today, you can plot out a course to get to where you want to be. But that requires that you focus more on how you respond to your circumstances than the circumstances themselves. Quote number 6, does then the truly beautiful need anything beyond? Nay, no more than law, than truth, than kindness, than modesty. Which of these owes its beauty to being praised, or loses it by being blamed? This is a tough one. This largely boils down to our constant need to be recognized for the good that we're doing in our marriage. Can you do good things for your spouse? Can you take out the trash? Can you do an extra load of laundry when you weren't asked? Can you help with the kids more than maybe you consider your fair share? Can you do these things and not require recognition for them? That's a really big test of our love for other people, is if the good things we do for them, we do contingent on being recognized for those things. That's not love. Love is giving freely and expecting nothing in return. If your spouse loves you, your spouse is also going to be giving freely to you without expecting in return. And so ultimately, you guys do get a lot from each other and you get returns for your goodness. But relying on that recognition in order to do the good things puts the power in the hands of other people and of your circumstances. Again, this is about realizing that you don't need your spouse to do things for you in order for you to be better. You can control that. You can start making a change today without anyone else changing around you. You can be kind and you can be honest and you can be dedicated to your marriage in a renewed, strengthened way. And you don't need your spouse to even notice it for it to be good. The good in those qualities and in the characteristics you're trying to adopt, that's objective good. You don't need recognition in order to know that that's right. And so if we can do what we know is right without other people telling us it's right, that's when we've taken in more power to ourselves, more autonomy, and are going to be able to have way more control over the quality of our lives than we did before. Quote number 7, try to live the life of the good man who is more than content with what is allotted to him out of the whole, and is satisfied with his own acts as just and his own disposition as kindly. See how that answers. This is about seeing what your happiness, your life outlook, your relationships, your health, whatever it is, seeing how much better those things can be when your main focus is on becoming a better version of yourself. So if you can be more honest, you can be kinder, If you can worry primarily about your own character, the way you think, the way you speak, the way you act, if you can worry about those things primarily and let go the concerns of what other people are doing, particularly your spouse, how much better could your life be? How much better could your day-to-day existence be if the goal was just to become a better you? And again, this is a byproduct of Stoicism, because Stoicism is about focus only on what you can control. But when you end up doing that, it does change other people. It does change the marriage. It might not change it as fast as you want. It might not change it in all of the ways you want, but it will change. So as you change, inevitably, your relation to the world around you and the people, and particularly the person closest to you, your spouse, that will change too. So at this point, Marcus Aurelius is basically saying, just give it a shot. See what would happen to your life if you start focusing on being a good man, a good woman, a good husband, a good father, or a good wife, and a good mother. Okay, moving on to Letters from a Stoic by Seneca. So Seneca is a little bit controversial in the Stoicism space. He lived in the 1st century in Rome. He was the tutor and a good friend and confidant to the Roman emperor at the time, Nero. Nero was a dictator, not a great leader by any means, according to, historians and philosophers who have studied that period. Seneca was a bit controversial because although he wrote a lot about Stoicism and seemed to be very fond of it, he didn't necessarily live up to it in his own life. So take that with a grain of salt, that I think we can glean a lot of usefulness from these quotes without relying on Seneca's life as an example of him actually living them out. Quote number 1, the most beautiful and admirable part of bravery is that it does not shrink from the stake, advances to meet wounds, and sometimes does not even avoid the spear, but meets it with opposing breast. I love this one. This one is about going beyond bravely facing trials and conflicts and fears when they approach you, but actually going out there and looking for them. So in your marriage, seeking out the areas that you're most fearful, that are darkest, that have been addressed the least. Figure out what scares you in your relationship, what you're too afraid to bring up with your spouse, the problems that you guys have swept under the rug or pushed into a corner and they've accumulated all this dust. What are those issues? What are those things that, because of the fear, because of the anxiety, or the years of hesitation to address these issues, they have just weighed down your relationship for so long? And instead of just waiting for them to pile up so high that you have to address them, actually preempting that process and addressing them head on, shining a light in the dark corners. If you want to improve your relationship as efficiently as possible, this is where you start, at the darkest points, at the points that really carry the most weight and the most fear, because those are obviously the issues that need the most help. And because we've put off addressing them for so long, they've gotten bigger and bigger to the point where if they don't get addressed now, it may be the end of the relationship. So being brave enough to actually confront the spear, hit it head on instead of waiting for it to come to you. Quote number 2, what absurdity lies in not being content with the daylight unless it is increased by a tiny fire? Rather than relying on chance or fortune to give you what you need to be successful in your marriage, instead focus on what you can do. So in this quote, the daylight is your own character. It's who you are as a human being. It's how you act every day. It's how you speak. And the tiny fire is that chance. It's circumstances. It's even your spouse. That the idea here is, if you are so good at being a spouse, if you are such an excellent husband or wife, then anything else contributing to the relationship is going to be small by comparison, because the higher quality of a spouse that you are, the less chance is ever going to matter. The less hard circumstances or difficulties in the relationship or what someone says or does, that's not going to matter nearly as much if you have built this solid foundation for your marriage based on your own character and all of the work that you've put in to be a solid person. And obviously, your spouse needs to do the same. Marriage is really interesting in that it takes two, and the relationship is very impacted by both people. But the idea is that if you can meet your spouse even past halfway, if you can do everything within your power to positively influence the relationship, you're going to have a way better chance of making it for a lifetime. You're going to be giving your spouse every example that he or she needs to become a better version of herself as well. So don't wish for the tiny fires. Don't wish that something falls your way or you can cut some corner. Instead, be the light in the relationship that makes the fires irrelevant. Quote number 3, "For it is not sufficient merely to commit these things to memory, like other matters. They must be practically tested. He is not happy who only knows them, but he who does them." I'm going to say that one more time. He is not happy who only knows them, but he who does them. That might be the most relevant quote to marriage therapy that has ever existed, even though obviously it was not originally said about marriage therapy. If you're learning all these skills and knowledge and you're developing this approach to your thoughts about your marriage, but you're not actually putting it into practice, you're not actually taking this knowledge and practicing these skills with your spouse, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much you know if you're not actually using the knowledge. It's kind of like a book. You read a book, let's say it's a book on getting in shape, and it gives you a list of things you can do to improve your endurance and your strength and your diet and your sleep habits, but then you don't do any of it. What good is the knowledge if you don't use it? It's the exact same when it comes to all of these life philosophies and all of the specifics about marriage therapy and everything on my channel too, is that if you don't implement it in your own life, it's not going to serve you. So this is really Seneca's way of challenging people himself, even if he didn't live up to it, challenging us to take this knowledge and use it to improve our marriage rather than just leaving it as something intangible knocking around inside of our heads. Okay, third and final piece of work, Enchiridion by Epictetus. So Epictetus is really interesting. He was a slave in the Roman Empire in the 1st and 2nd centuries. He actually was a slave to one of the former slaves of the Emperor Nero, who Seneca worked for. And while he was enslaved, he got a chance to study philosophy and really fell in love with stoicism, particularly because he started to notice that even though he was legally a slave, he was more free than all of the statesmen that he saw, all of the politicians that had enslaved him, because he wasn't so reliant on other people's opinions of him or holding certain positions of power or having certain financial accomplishments. He didn't need any of that to be satisfied with his life, to feel like his life was worthwhile and that he was living according to his values, that because he had this sense of interior freedom, he didn't let other people get to him. He didn't let his circumstances bother him. He was actually way more free, even though he was a slave, than all of these powerful political figures at the time. Quote number 1, "This is the price paid for a calm spirit. This is the price for peace of mind. Nothing is got without a price. You will be unjust, therefore, and insatiable, if, while refusing to pay the price for which such things are bought, you want to obtain them for nothing." When we get married, we sign up for a lifetime. We tell each other, I want to be with you for the rest of our natural born lives together. And when we sign up for that commitment, what happens to us in our marriage is what we signed up for. In a really real sense, even the hardest trials and tribulations and hardships and whatever happens to the two of you, you guys signed up for that. And you can absolutely improve the state of your marriage. Any couple can. I firmly believe that with commitment from both spouses, the marriage can radically change. But with the commitment of a lifetime to each other, made up of two flawed people, all of those trials, that's part of the deal. That's part of what we asked for when we got married. And I know that sounds really radical, but even if to some degree we still have this internal fight going on of, this isn't what I expected marriage to be like. This isn't what I signed up for. This isn't what I wanted. I wanted something else. If we can challenge that thought by saying, okay, when I first got married, it's a good chance I didn't know what marriage actually entailed. I expected it to be one way, and it's now been this other way. And so when I signed up for this, maybe I didn't know exactly what the future held. I was not fully informed, but no one ever is. And just because your expectations haven't been met doesn't mean that what you're getting isn't at sometimes even required when it comes to a marriage between two flawed people. Instead of blaming the marriage, instead of blaming our spouse, embracing the fact that maybe this is just part of it. Maybe this is part of what it means to be married for decades and decades to the same person without ever taking a break. And the people who don't get married, the people who get divorced, they don't get lifelong marriage because they didn't pay the price. They weren't willing to pay the price. And so if you are right now really struggling, but you want to save your relationship and you're hopeful that your spouse does too, embracing this idea that we are paying the price right now. We are paying to have a lifelong marriage together as long as we're both alive. And this is just part of that payment. You can't get the steak at a nice restaurant if you won't pay for it. You can get a less expensive dish or just an appetizer or something, and that's what some people do. But if you want the steak, if you want the lifelong marriage, it's a bigger price to pay. And for a lot of people, I think when we realize that that price is just inherent in marriage, it's just part of what it means to be married, that we have to sacrifice our free time, and we probably lose some sleep, particularly when we become parents. And sometimes we're really stressed, and sometimes we fight a lot, and sometimes, there's going to be tears and disappointments and really difficult experiences. But that is part of the package. Once we can accept that, we can stop thinking, okay, there's something wrong with my relationship because we're having these struggles. No, it's not that your relationship is wrong. It's that it's forever. It's that it's hard to be married forever. That's just part of it. And so taking away some of that judgment that, why am I struggling so much? Why are me and my spouse having so many problems? Taking away some judgment from you and the relationship and your spouse, and realizing that it's normal, that this is part of the price you have to pay for a lifelong love. Quote number 2, he keeps guard against himself as though he were his own enemy lying in wait. I think this is a really good thought experiment. Asking yourself the question, what if you were your marriage's worst enemy and it wasn't your spouse, and it wasn't, what you're going through with your kids, or it wasn't the illness or the job loss or the infidelity or whatever else is out there that is impacting your relationship? What if you were the worst enemy of your marriage? That's not saying that you are. If you're watching this video, chances are you are really fighting hard to save the relationship and to contribute positively to it. However, adopting a mindset that you might actually be sabotaging your own efforts in some way, or your spouse's efforts, sabotaging the relationship in some way that you don't know because you haven't thought about it, that's a really valuable exercise, because it helps you narrow down into the things that you can actually change on your own without buy-in from anyone else, without chance, without good fortune, without fate, without anything being on your side except for you. What are the things that you might be doing that you could change, that could transform the relationship right now without relying on anything else to get started? Quote number 3, it is not the things themselves that disturb men, but their judgments about these things. This is, in a lot of ways, kind of the crux of a lot of Stoic teachings, and that is that you control your life, the quality of your life, and its outcomes by controlling how you respond to your environment. So giving up trying to control your spouse, giving up trying to control what happens to you, and instead focus on controlling what you do about it. It's growing up, I heard a lot, it's not what happens to you in life, it's how you take it. It's the same sort of idea. This idea stands the test of time because it's true for every human that's ever walked this earth, that how happy you are, how content, how peaceful, how much love you feel, that all has so much more to do with how you interpret what's happening in your life versus what actually is happening. So for example, in your marriage, if your spouse yells at you, if you got home a little bit late and your spouse is annoyed because you guys had a dinner planned, and instead of reacting to your spouse in a frustrated way and getting angry back and escalating the fight, that's only going to make it worse. That's only going to make the reality of that night a lot worse. If you then say instead, I'm sorry, I messed up, I want to go out with you anyway, this is a fun date night, I've really been looking forward to this, I love you so much, and I'm gonna work on this. I'm going to try to get home on time as much as possible in the future, and if I mess up, please forgive me because I'm not perfect, but I promise I'm working on it. It just fundamentally changes the entire situation. And the only thing that was different was what you did. It didn't have anything to do with your spouse. Your spouse is the exact same in both scenarios. The only difference is how you responded to it. Quote number 4, do not seek to have everything that happens happen as you wish, but wish for everything to happen as it actually does happen, and your life will be serene. This has been a really big one for me recently because I've started to notice that as I stretch out the timeline of the effects of a situation, oftentimes they turn out to be very different than I thought they were going to be. And what I mean by that is if something bad happens to me or something that I think is bad, for example, let's say the other day I missed my flight. This actually happened. We showed up 1 minute late to the airport and they wouldn't let us board. And I was not happy about it. If I had just expanded my timeline to a day later, that was an extra day that I got to see my family. And that ended up being a really special day for all of us. So in the moment, if I had said, okay, I don't actually know if this is going to turn out good or bad. I don't know if the consequences of this moment are going to be good or bad in the future because I haven't seen it yet. So if we can embrace not knowing really if a situation is good or bad that happens to us, then we can be a lot more at peace with what happens rather than being, tossed around by what happens to us in our life and be in a good mood or a bad mood depending on how we're perceiving situations. Instead, if we can say, actually, I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to be the best person I can be. I'm going to treat people well. I'm going to work hard, whatever it is. And then what happens, that's what I want to happen. And it sounds odd, especially when you get into the bigger issues, like if your child gets sick or your spouse gets sick or you get in an accident or you lose your job or whatever it is. In those moments, it can be really hard to think, well, why would I actually want this to happen? But we never know what's going to happen in the future as a result of those situations. And even if we didn't want that to happen, even if we didn't want to lose our job or we didn't want our loved one to get sick, we have no idea the outcomes. And we can't control that situation anyway. And so shifting away from judgment of the situation towards an embrace of what's going on in our lives, that's how you achieve peace. Quote number 5, lay down for yourself at the outset a certain stamp and type of character for yourself, which you are to maintain whether you are by yourself or are meeting with people. How are you going to act? How are you going to think and speak no matter what your spouse does? This is so big that what your spouse does, how your spouse behaves, should not determine how well you treat your spouse. It shouldn't determine if you do things out of love, if you do things for the good of your spouse, if you're honest, if you're reliable, if you are kind. You should be all of those things, even if your spouse is not being those things. That's real love, but that's also real internal power because it says that I don't have to be tossed around by the tides of other people's moods. I don't have to ride the roller coaster with my spouse. I love my spouse. I will be empathetic and I will try to help when my spouse is struggling with something, but that doesn't mean that you stoop to the lows of how your spouse acts. It doesn't mean that you only behave well when your spouse is behaving well. There's no freedom in that. That is literally being chained to someone else's behavior to dictate your life. And tying into that is the next quote number 6. Whoever therefore wants to be free, let him neither wish for anything nor avoid anything that is under the control of others, or else he is necessarily a slave. You can be invincible if you never enter a contest in which victory is not under your control. So your goals and the things you focus on should only be things that you can actually control the outcome of. So, for example, if your goal is to stop fighting with your spouse, well, you don't have total control over that because your spouse has to also be bought into that. But if your goal is to never raise your voice with your spouse, never express anything out of anger or frustration, to stay calm, those are things you can control. And chances are, if you do that over and over again in every fight you guys have, you're probably going to fight a lot less, because it takes two people to have a blowout disagreement. If you refuse to rise to the anger levels of your spouse, then there's no fight there. Your spouse is left fighting herself or fighting himself, and you're making the relationship better purely by controlling what you can actually control. That makes you invincible, because no one else can knock you off of your game of maintaining your peace and maintaining control of yourself. And lastly, quote number 7, now is the contest, and here before you are the Olympic Games, and that it is impossible to delay any longer, and this it depends on a single day and a single action, whether progress is lost or saved. There's no better time to improve your relationship than right now. You're watching this video, it means that you want something to change. So take seriously your relationship, take seriously the situation you're in, take seriously your own ability to actually make a difference. You are so capable of changing the situation simply by shifting your focus from things that are outside of your control to things that are within your control, from shifting your goals to character traits you want to develop rather than outcomes that you want that rely on other people. You can become a phenomenal spouse, independent of the person you're married to. And chances are, if you do that, the person you're married to is also going to change in ways that you maybe never expected. Okay, guys, I hope that video was useful. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for all things related to building a lifelong marriage. And just a reminder to share this video with anyone who you think could really benefit from its message. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know the sort of content you guys want to see. I'm Cameron, and this is Modern Marriage. I'll see you guys next week.